And cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to VR Roundup and a Game and Friday to boot. You guys know my favorite day of the week, bar none. Excited to get started here because I want to talk about some comments from the last video that tie into this first story. And it's going to be more editorial style. I think it's one of those that I just want to kind of digest and take apart a little bit. And it has to do with numbers that Sony released ahead of their Sony Experience event this week. Namely, PlayStation VR units sold. They've officially broken the 2 million mark, which is huge. And they've done that in a condensed time frame. The last 4 months, essentially, almost doubling, which probably a product of some of the games released, price drops, all of the above, etc. Where it gets interesting, though, is the attach rate ratio for the gaming side. 12.2 million PlayStation VR titles sold to date globally. If you do the math, and I've done it already for us, it's essentially every PlayStation VR owner has on average 6 virtual reality titles. So I thought it would be a neat exercise to see how that ratio compares to PlayStation 4 units and games. What I should have done, and probably will still do, is then go on to compare it to the Xbox, etc., just in terms of the game side, to even see if it's a healthy ratio to begin with. But those 6 titles, well, PlayStation 4, 70 million consoles to date globally, 435 million games. Again, if you do the math there, which I've already done, you come up with the same number. Now, potentially, had the VR number been much lower, probably not a good sign. But the fact that it's dead even, we're talking for every PlayStation 4 console owner, they've got on average about 6 titles. So very interesting. Like I said, that exercise probably requires digging a little further, seeing how that ratio is in general. But yeah, very interesting. And it ties into comments from the last video, and they weren't negative in the sense of the typical doom and gloom scenarios for VR. It was more posed as a question, and I forget your name, apologies in advance, where the poster said, does anybody else feel that VR is going to fail again this third attempt? I feel that way. And most people answered no, that they didn't believe so, me included. And the reason for that, and I've said it before, but it probably got lost in some non-gaming VR news, which isn't the most glamorous, but it's critical to the discussion. And that is simply that, to use a really bad analogy, VR this time around is almost like lawn weed, a really killer, ferocious lawn weed that has burrowed its roots everywhere. For VR, that's outside of gaming, and I think that is the key. Last time around in the early 90s, the technology was simply too primitive to provide benefit in a lot of industries that require, simply put, better graphics, lower latency, etc. We're just starting to get to that point now, but look at the benefit to healthcare, for example. Surgeons able to look at tumors in innovative and new ways with the help of VR. So critical as another tool in their arsenal, they're not going to go back to not using VR. And that applies to so many other industries we've talked about. The automotive industry, increasingly augmented and virtual reality becoming important tools for them. Architects, real estate, the list goes on. So if gaming was really doing bad, like really, really bad, and those outside industries didn't exist, I could see that being a valid concern. But those other industries are just too important, and VR too important a technology for them. I just don't see the clock going back. Also, the growth that we have experienced is definitely picking up. The Sony PlayStation VR, just one example, Rift, Vive also. And The reason, simply a combination of all those variables that we've talked about that we knew had to come into effect to see faster growth, namely pricing. It had to get lower. Variety of titles had to get better, and it has. And I think that's the end result of what we're seeing and why I don't think this time around VR is going anywhere. Let me know your thoughts, guys, in the comments below on that. This next story, still PlayStation VR related, still chart related, Skyrim VR topping the PlayStation VR sales charts. That's in terms of all virtual reality games for that platform. It's number one. I would love to know similar figures on the PC side of things, so I'm going to dig into that a little bit after this program. So we don't have an exact figure, but we do know it was leading the pack. And next up, also on the PlayStation VR front, just because it won, I'm talking about Resident Evil 7 VR for PlayStation VR, taking the Game Award as winner of this year's Best Virtual Reality Game. But what I wanted to talk about is the Resident Evil 7, talking about comments. If you go to the comment section for this article, it's amazing how love or hate, how polar opposite the feelings towards Resident Evil 7 are. I had no idea that they were that black and white, that extreme, almost to the point there doesn't seem to be any neutral ground. People either really loved the game or really disliked it. And I was seeing comments about motion controls. I was so immersed in that damn game, the control architecture, for me personally, didn't even really come into play. Were there things I would have improved on? Absolutely. But for a game to basically ruin horror movies for me, yeah, that's a pretty powerful experience. But hey, everybody's going to have different opinions. That's the magic of, not having boring gaming catalogs. There's something for everybody out there. I just thought it was interesting that the comment extremes were that extreme. And next up, some technology news. The new Snapdragon 845 bringing some substantial improvements to the table over the Snapdragon 835. First up, CPU featuring 8 new CPU cores, 4 ARM Cortex A75s, and 4 Cortex A55s. The fastest and most efficient cores that ARM has produced to date, and Qualcomm has tweaked them even further to improve latency and performance. Benchmarks on the CPU side of the equation showing a 25 to 30% improvement over the 835. How about the GPU? Well, arguably more important than the CPU, and benchmarks showing a 30% improvement as well for the Adreno 630. Qualcomm claims it can power VR headsets with dual 2K displays at a refresh rate of 120 Hz. All this added power even coming at a 30%, according to Qualcomm, reduction in power consumption, which is great news as heat management absolutely has been an issue and wasn't Qualcomm's strong suit. Lastly, the GPU has improved features like multi-view rendering, which improves rendering and CPU load, so the GPU doing most of the heavy lifting as you would expect. And next up, game that I'm super excited for, certainly starting to appear like the ZeniMax conglomerate was saving the best for last. So both Skyrim VR and Doom VFR have launched, albeit with some heavy criticism, most people agreeing that between the two, the nod likely going to the Skyrim version. Well, Fallout 4 addressing a lot of the complaints that people had with either of those titles, namely locomotion. Right off the bat, the folks behind Fallout 4 seem to have gone full tilt into ensuring there's a locomotion option for pretty much everyone in Fallout 4. Very, very tweakable. Now, while modding is not supported, there's a lack of DLC content, it will include all the locations, characters, and quests of the original vanilla game. Combat as well has been tweaked for VR, as has crafting and building systems. Now, unlike Skyrim for PC, the Steam version of Fallout 4 will pull all that locomotion off with the Vive controllers, which is good. Now, it remains to be seen, as Rift is not officially supported, whether it's going to work or, again, require a third-party Valve booster patch. We'll have to wait and see for that. Also, it boasts the best graphics compared to the non-VR games of the bunch. Now, I've said personally, I don't think graphics are as important in VR as they are for traditional games on a monitor, and that has to do with immersion and feelings of presence, although some of that is impacted by better graphics. I just think that threshold, the forgiveness factor, much bigger on the VR side of things. Now, that doesn't come without a price, though. The minimum specs, guys, get this, GTX 1070 on the NVIDIA side, or an AMD RX Vega 56 or better on the AMD side. So if you've got a slightly more anemic card, definitely recommend waiting for my or other people's reviews in terms of performance. For example, I'm going to be testing this on some lower end graphic cards that I have sitting in the house, and I'll let you know. Now, HTC Vive version launching this upcoming Monday, the 11th. So it's going to be one day ahead of schedule. Can't wait. Ben Lang, over on Road to VR, was able to try out the most recent version of the Striker VR. That's this haptic rifle, and he had some thoughts on this improved version. First thing he noticed, that the new prototype has a more ergonomic handle and the geometry around the grip modified, providing a lot better usability. The second thing he noticed as he pulled the trigger is that the new prototype is practically silent compared to its predecessor. While the prior prototype made a loud clack-clack sound with every trigger pull, the new prototype substantially muffled without losing any of the haptic kick. That's helpful because it means the real-world audio isn't going to conflict with the VR audio, allowing the game creators to decide what the weapon should sound like via the software. And I love the last tidbit that Ben shared. Apparently, Striker VR co-founder Martin Hawley told Ben they had to turn down the recoil power on this newest prototype as the pre-production plastic molds were breaking with it at full power. So that's some substantial kickback. And our last story, very interesting article on VR Focus. It's an interview Kevin Joyce of VR Focus had with Jason Rubin. He, of course, Oculus's VP of content, and they talked about franchise gaming for VR and the whole business of porting existing titles. Now, I found the headline a little misleading, and it reads as if he doesn't believe Call of Duty in VR will work very well. But that's misleading. It's not really what he's saying. So I kind of wanted to discuss the interview in a bit more detail than that headline affords, as it's an interesting topic and I think it needs some discussion. So in the interview, he's saying, don't just take an existing franchise and expect it to port smoothly over to VR. And I agree with him there. And I've stated it numerous times. For example, cockpit games, he says, and I've said this too, those types of games were always striving to be VR games, just by design. So the porting process, fluid, and it's natural and an organic fit. He then talks about one of his own past titles, Crash Bandicoot, and how it wouldn't just work ported straight over to VR. Where I think the title is misleading, though, is when he talks directly about action FPS games. Specifically, he uses the example of Call of Duty. He wasn't saying a game like Call of Duty won't work in VR. He's just saying that simply porting it over to VR without VR-centric adaptions is where it's going to fail. And that's completely different from what the title suggests. And absolutely, I would agree with him there. And it's interesting, just my 2 cents on that, because we know FPS games can work. Talked about it in my Doom VFR video, that Doom 3 BFG, still one of my favorite FPS experiences in VR to date. Raw data, which is a fast experience, and it's an FPS action game. It works very, very well. Serious Sam, I mean, we could go on. We know FPS can work. Again, it's just making sure that through that kind of porting over process, that it's built from the ground up locomotion wise. It needs to factor that in, absolutely. And I like the example that he uses with Call of Duty. He says a lot of the design decisions and factors that go into that franchise, they've been around for decades, molded literally over decades. You can't just port it for that very reason. A lot of those things, those design decisions that took decades, need to be thought out carefully when porting to virtual reality. He had another example, which I liked as well. He talked about, again, his game Crash Bandicoot. Some of the design decisions at the time weren't just ones that they, got around a table and kind of brainstormed. They were to address specific technology limitations at the time. The black gloves, for example, strictly as a color that they could track. Features of Bandicoot's face, for example, the big eyes, the nose, that was just a result of them having a limited amount of pixels, and they wanted those features to stand out. So very interesting, and I agree, very on point. Let me know your thoughts on that, guys. And with that said, it is Game Friday. Thus ends this VR Roundup. Have a kick-arse Game Friday, guys. Fantastic weekend. We'll see you again soon. Cheers.